Daniel stood outside the big glass doors of Westmont Music Academy, trying to calm his racing heart. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from excitement mixed with nervousness. He had been waiting for this day for 3 years. 3 long years of saving every dollar he could spare from his job at the local grocery store. The building itself looked like something from a movie. Tall white columns, perfectly cut grass, and windows so clean they sparkled in the morning sun. Daniel looked down at his shoes. They were clean. He had made sure of that, but the sole on his right shoe had a crack running through it. His jeans were faded from too many washes, and his jacket, though warm, had a small tear on the sleeve that his mom had stitched up last week. He pulled open the heavy door and stepped inside. The cool air hit his face immediately. Everything smelled expensive. The floor was made of smooth marble that reflected the crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling. His old sneakers squeaked slightly as he walked, and he winced at the sound. A group of students stood near the entrance laughing about something. They all looked like they belonged here. Designer bags, new clothes, the kind of confidence that comes from never worrying about money. One girl had a violin case that probably cost more than Daniel's family paid for rent in a month. As he walked past them toward the reception desk, he felt their eyes on him. The laughter got a bit louder. He heard one boy whisper something and the others giggled. Daniel kept his eyes forward, his jaw tight. This wasn't new to him. Being poor in a world that valued money above everything else meant he had developed thick skin over the years. The woman at the reception desk looked up from her computer. Her eyes traveled from his face down to his shoes and back up again. Her smile was polite but cold. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she doubted he was in the right place. "I'm here for the open audition," Daniel said, keeping his voice steady. "My name is Daniel Chen." She clicked through her computer, her long nails tapping against the keys. "Ah, yes, I see your name here. You paid the registration fee online, correct?" "Yes, ma'am." "The waiting room is down that hall, second door on your left. Your audition is scheduled for 2:30 this afternoon." "Thank you," Daniel said, but she had already gone back to her computer. He walked down the hallway, his backpack feeling heavier with each step. The walls were covered with photos of famous musicians who had studied here. Concert pianists, opera singers, orchestra conductors. All of them looked successful, polished, like they had never known struggle. The waiting room was already half full. About 15 other students sat in chairs, some with their parents, others alone. Everyone looked nervous, but there was a difference. Their nervousness came from competition. His nervousness came from feeling like he didn't belong. He found an empty chair in the corner and sat down, placing his backpack carefully on his lap. Inside was his only valuable possession, a small digital recorder his grandmother had given him before she passed away. He used it to record himself playing so he could listen back and improve. The other students were talking in small groups. He heard conversations about private instructors who charged $200 per hour, about summer music camps in Europe, about performing at prestigious venues. One boy was bragging about playing at Carnegie Hall when he was 12. Daniel pulled out his phone, not to use it, but just to have something to look at. He didn't have anyone to call. His mom was at work, cleaning offices downtown. His dad was probably starting his second shift at the warehouse. They both worked so hard, and he wanted nothing more than to make them proud today. "So where did you train?" a voice asked. Daniel looked up. A girl with perfectly styled hair and an expensive-looking dress was staring at him, along with 2 of her friends. They weren't being friendly. He could tell by the smirk on her face. "The community center," Daniel answered honestly. "On Maple Street." The girl's eyebrows shot up. "The community center? You mean like a public place?" "Yeah. And who's your private instructor?" "I don't have one. I taught myself mostly. Watched videos online, read books from the library." The silence that followed was worse than laughter. The girl and her friends exchanged looks that said everything. Then one of them started giggling, trying to hold it back but failing. Soon all 3 were laughing, not even trying to hide it anymore. "YouTube tutorials?" one of the friends said, loud enough for others to hear. "That's actually hilarious." "My instructor studied directly under 3 different concert pianists," the first girl said, loud and proud. "He charges $5,000 a month, and there's a waiting list to get in with him." Other students were watching now. Some looked uncomfortable, others amused. Daniel felt heat rising in his face, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had dealt with this kind of thing his whole life. Kids at school making fun of his clothes. Neighbors looking down at his family's small apartment. Cashiers at stores following him around like he might steal something. "Why are you even here?" another boy asked, not meanly but genuinely curious. "I mean, this audition costs money. If you can't afford proper training, why waste everyone's time?" Daniel took a breath before answering. "Because I can play. That's why I'm here." "Everyone here can play," the girl shot back. "The question is whether you can play well enough. This academy only accepts 5% of auditions, and those spots usually go to people who've been training properly since they were children." She wasn't entirely wrong. Daniel knew the statistics. He had researched this academy for years. It was one of the best music schools in the entire country. Getting accepted here meant doors opening that stayed closed to most people. But he also knew something else. He knew that when he sat down at a piano, something magical happened. Something he couldn't quite explain but could definitely feel. "I guess we'll see," Daniel said quietly. The girl rolled her eyes and turned back to her friends, dismissing him completely. They went back to their conversation about some music festival in Vienna that they had all attended last summer. Daniel looked at the clock on the wall. It was only noon. He had 2.5 more hours to wait. 2.5 hours of sitting in this room, feeling out of place, listening to others talk about opportunities he had never had. But he didn't let himself think about that too much. Instead, he closed his eyes and did what he always did when he felt overwhelmed. He played music in his mind. His fingers moved slightly, pressing invisible keys on invisible piano. He ran through the piece he planned to perform note by note, feeling each moment, each emotion. When he played in his head, it didn't matter that his clothes were old or that he learned from YouTube. When he played, he was free, and in a few hours, he would show everyone in this building exactly what that freedom sounded like. The minutes crawled by like hours. Daniel watched as other students were called one by one for their auditions. Each time someone left, the room got a little quieter, a little more tense. He could hear faint music coming from down the hall, muffled by the thick walls but still audible enough to tell that everyone here was talented. Around 1 o'clock, a few parents arrived with lunch for their kids, expensive-looking sandwiches from fancy cafes, fresh fruit, bottled smoothies. Daniel pulled out the peanut butter sandwich he had made that morning. The bread was a little squished from being in his backpack, but it tasted fine. He ate slowly, trying to make it last. The girl from earlier, the one who had laughed at him, was named Victoria. He overheard her friends calling her that. She was eating sushi from a black container, using chopsticks like she had done it 1,000 times. Every few minutes she would glance over at Daniel, whisper something to her friends, and they would all smile. "I heard someone tried to audition last year who learned from YouTube," Victoria said. Not exactly whispering, but not shouting either. Just loud enough for Daniel to hear. The professor stopped him after 30 seconds. "They said it was painful to listen to." Her friends laughed on cue. "That's so embarrassing," one of them added. "Imagine thinking you could compete with people who've had real training. It's like showing up to a race in a broken bicycle when everyone else has sports cars." Daniel kept chewing his sandwich, refusing to react. He knew what they were doing. They wanted him to feel small, to doubt himself, maybe even to leave. But he had come too far to let some mean comments shake him. A boy sitting across from Daniel caught his eye and gave him a small, sympathetic smile. At least not everyone here was cruel. But the boy didn't say anything. He just went back to looking at his sheet music, probably not wanting to become a target himself. By 2 o'clock, only 8 students remained in the waiting room, including Daniel. The atmosphere had shifted from nervous chatter to dead silence. This was it. The final group of the day. The door opened and a woman stepped in. She was maybe 50 years old with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, and glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She wore a simple black dress and carried a clipboard. "Good afternoon, everyone," she said, her voice warm but professional. "I'm Professor Catherine Walsh. I'm one of the judges for today's auditions, and I also serve as the head of the piano department here at Westmont." Everyone sat up a little straighter. "I want to thank you all for coming today. I know auditions are stressful, but remember, we're not here to judge you as people. We're here to hear your music. That's all that matters once you sit at that piano." She smiled, and it seemed genuine, unlike the receptionist's smile from earlier. "We're running a few minutes behind schedule, but we should be back on track soon. In the meantime, there are restrooms down the hall if anyone needs them. Try to stay relaxed. As she turned to leave, her eyes passed over Daniel. For just a second, she paused and something in her expression changed. Not pity, not judgment, just curiosity. Then she was gone. "Stay relaxed," Victoria muttered. Easy for her to say. She's not the one performing. At 2:20, another student was called, then another at 2:40. Daniel was scheduled for 2:30, but clearly they were behind. He didn't mind. More time to prepare mentally. Finally, at 2:55, a young man with a clipboard opened the door. "Daniel Chen." Daniel stood up, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. This was real. This was actually happening. "Good luck," the sympathetic boy whispered as Daniel walked past. "Thanks," Daniel managed to say. He followed the young man down a long hallway. His shoes still squeaked on the polished floor. They passed practice rooms where he could see students playing various instruments. A girl was singing scales. A boy was playing violin. The sounds blended together into a strange kind of harmony. Then they reached two large wooden doors. The young man pushed them open, and Daniel stepped into the auditorium. It was bigger than he expected. The ceiling stretched up impossibly high with beautiful paintings covering it. Rows of red velvet seats spread out before him, and at the front of the room, bathed in natural light from tall windows, sat a grand piano. A Steinway. He could tell even from the doorway. About 30 people were scattered throughout the auditorium. Some were students waiting for their own auditions. Others were parents. A few looked like teachers or staff, and in the front row sat 3 people behind a long table. Professor Walsh was one of them. The other 2 were men, both older, both looking serious. Daniel walked down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing in the large space. He heard a few whispers as he passed. He tried not to think about what they might be saying. When he reached the stage, he climbed the short steps and approached the piano. Up close, it was even more beautiful. The black surface was so polished he could see his reflection in it. He reached out and touched it gently, running his fingers along the smooth wood. This instrument probably cost more than his family's car, their furniture, everything they owned combined, and for the next few minutes it was his. "Whenever you're ready," Professor Walsh called from her seat. Her voice echoed slightly. "Please state your name and what you'll be performing." Daniel cleared his throat. "My name is Daniel Chen, and I'll be playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, third movement." A ripple of surprise went through the audience. He heard someone gasp. Someone else whispered, "Is he serious?" Even Professor Walsh raised her eyebrows. One of the other judges leaned over and whispered something to her. Daniel knew why they were surprised. Rachmaninoff was not easy. This particular piece was known for being extremely difficult, even for advanced pianists. The technical skill required was immense. The emotional depth needed was even greater. It was the kind of piece that could make or break an audition. He sat down on the bench and adjusted it slightly, getting the height just right. Then he looked at the keys, 88 of them, black and white, waiting. From somewhere in the middle rows, he heard Victoria's voice, not quite a whisper. "This is going to be a disaster." Quiet laughter followed. Daniel closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He let all the noise fade away. The whispers, the doubts, the mean comments, all of it disappeared. In his mind, there was only the music. His grandmother used to tell him that music was a language everyone understood, but few could speak fluently. She said that when you play from your heart, people can hear your story even without words. Daniel placed his fingers on the keys. The piano felt cool under his touch, smooth and perfect. He thought about his parents working hard every day so he could have opportunities they never had. He thought about all the nights he practiced on that old broken piano at the community center, the one with keys that stuck and pedals that squeaked. He thought about every person who ever looked at him and saw only poverty, never potential. Then he began to play. And in that moment, everything changed. The first notes rang out through the auditorium like a bell, clear and pure. Then the second phrase came, and the third, and suddenly the music was pouring out of Daniel like water from a broken dam. The effect was immediate and stunning. Every single conversation stopped. Every whisper died mid-sentence. The students who had been looking at their phones put them down. The parents who had been reviewing sheet music looked up. Even the judges, who had probably heard hundreds of auditions in their careers, sat forward in their seats. Daniel's fingers moved across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed almost impossible. The difficult runs that made most pianists stumble came out perfectly smooth. His left hand provided a powerful foundation, while his right hand sang the melody with a clarity that filled every corner of the huge room. But it wasn't just technical perfection. Anyone with enough practice could hit the right notes. What poured out of that piano was something deeper, something that couldn't be taught in any lesson. It was emotion. Raw, honest, real emotion. You could hear struggle in the music. You could hear hope fighting against doubt. You could hear the sound of someone who had climbed mountains just to get to this moment. Every phrase told a story. Every crescendo built not just in volume but in meaning. Professor Walsh felt goosebumps rise on her arms. In her 30 years of teaching, she had heard countless talented students. But this was different. This wasn't a student trying to impress judges. This was a young man pouring his entire soul into music. The other two judges had similar reactions. Professor Martin, who taught theory and had a reputation for being impossible to impress, actually felt his eyes getting wet. He blinked rapidly, trying to maintain his professional composure. The third judge, Dr. Helen Park, gripped the edge of the table. She had been teaching piano for 42 years. She had seen prodigies and geniuses. She had heard performances at the world's greatest concert halls. And yet, sitting in this auditorium on a random Tuesday afternoon, she was hearing something that made her heart race like she was 20 years old again, falling in love with music for the first time. In the audience, students sat frozen. Victoria's mouth had fallen open slightly. Her arms, which had been crossed in skeptical judgment, now hung loosely at her sides. The sushi container sat forgotten on the seat next to her. The boy who had wished Daniel good luck was smiling, actual tears running down his face. He didn't even realize he was crying. One mother grabbed her husband's hand and squeezed it tight. She whispered, "Oh my God." But even she couldn't hear her own voice over the music. Daniel was lost in it now. His eyes were closed, his body swaying slightly with the rhythm. He wasn't thinking about technique anymore. He wasn't worried about making mistakes or impressing anyone. He was just playing, letting the music flow through him like it always had, like it always would. The piece had moments of tenderness so delicate they seemed to hang in the air like morning mist. Then it would build into passages of such power and intensity that you could feel it in your chest. Daniel navigated every shift perfectly, never losing the emotional thread that tied it all together. His hands moved in ways that looked almost impossible. The reaches that should have been difficult seemed effortless. The complex rhythms that tangled up most pianists came out crisp and clear, but there were also moments where his technique was unconventional, where he did things differently than how the textbook said they should be done. And somehow, those moments made it even more beautiful, because Daniel hadn't learned from a prestigious instructor who corrected every tiny flaw. He had learned from his heart, from listening to recordings hundreds of times, from playing until his fingers hurt and then playing some more. His technique had developed naturally, shaped by passion rather than rigid rules. The result was something unique, something authentic. Professor Walsh found herself thinking about why she became a music teacher in the first place. It wasn't for the salary or the prestige of teaching at Westmont. It was for moments like this, moments when music stopped being notes on a page and became something alive, something that could change you just by hearing it. As Daniel moved into the final section of the piece, the intensity built. His whole body was engaged now, leaning into the powerful chords, pulling back for the softer moments. Sweat had formed on his forehead. His breathing was deep and controlled. The climax of the piece approached, those massive chords that required every ounce of strength and control. Daniel's hands crashed down on the keys with perfect precision, the sound filling the auditorium like thunder. But even in that power there was beauty. There was purpose. Then came the resolution, those final phrases that brought everything together. Daniel played them with a tenderness that broke your heart. The music got softer and softer, like a whisper, like a prayer. The last note hung in the air, sustained by the pedal, gradually fading into silence. Daniel kept his hands on the keys, his eyes still closed, letting the moment settle. His heart was racing. His fingers tingled. He felt like he had just run a marathon and climbed a mountain at the same time. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The silence in the auditorium was absolute, almost sacred. Then Professor Walsh stood up. Her chair scraped against the floor, breaking the spell. She brought her hands together in applause, and the sound echoed through the room. The other judges immediately stood and joined her. Dr. Park was openly crying now, not caring who saw. Professor Martin clapped hard, his face red with emotion. Then everyone else stood. The entire auditorium rose to their feet. Students who had laughed at Daniel were now applauding with tears in their eyes. Parents who didn't even know him were clapping as hard as they could. The young man with the clipboard who had led Daniel to the auditorium was standing in the back, shaking his head in disbelief while he clapped. Victoria stood slowly, as if in a trance. She brought her hands together mechanically at first, then faster, harder. Her friends beside her were doing the same, all traces of mockery gone from their faces. The applause grew louder and louder. It echoed off the high ceiling, surrounding Daniel from all sides. He finally opened his eyes. For a moment he looked confused, like he had forgotten where he was. Then he saw everyone standing, saw them clapping, and the reality of what had just happened hit him. He had done it. He had actually done it. Daniel stood up from the piano bench, his legs feeling shaky. He gave a small, awkward bow, not really knowing what else to do. The applause continued, showing no signs of stopping. Professor Walsh was walking toward the stage, still clapping. When she reached the steps, she climbed up and approached Daniel. Up close, he could see that her eyes were wet. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. Daniel's throat felt tight. "At the community center on Maple Street. There's an old piano there that nobody else wanted to use. And your teacher? I don't have one. I taught myself. YouTube videos, library books, just listening to recordings and trying to understand them." Professor Walsh shook her head slowly, a smile spreading across her face. "That's impossible. What you just played, that's not something you can teach yourself. I guess I proved it's possible," Daniel said quietly. The other judges had joined them on stage now. Dr. Park reached out and took Daniel's hand in both of hers. "Young man, I have been teaching music for over 4 decades. I've heard students who went on to perform at Carnegie Hall, at the Sydney Opera House, at the Royal Albert Hall. And I can honestly say that what you just did is one of the most moving performances I have ever witnessed." Professor Martin nodded in agreement. "The technical skill is impressive, yes. But the emotion, the storytelling, the pure musicality, that's a gift. That's something rare. Would you play something else for us?" Professor Walsh asked. "Anything you want. We need to hear more." Daniel looked at the 3 judges, then out at the audience that was still standing, still watching him. These were the people who had laughed at him less than an hour ago. The people who had judged him for his clothes and his background. But now they weren't laughing. Now they were seeing him for who he really was. Daniel walked back to the piano and sat down again. The bench still felt warm from where he had been sitting moments before. He looked at the keys, thinking about what to play next. The judges wanted to hear more. That meant they were interested. That meant maybe, just maybe, he had a real chance. He decided to do something risky. Instead of playing another classical piece, he was going to improvise. He was going to create something right there on the spot, letting his fingers go wherever they wanted to go. "I'm going to play something I made up," Daniel said, his voice carrying through the quiet auditorium. "I don't have a name for it yet." Professor Walsh smiled. "We'd love to hear it." Daniel placed his hands on the keys and began to play. This time there was no sheet music in his head to follow. No composer's instructions to obey. This was pure creation, pure expression. The music started soft and gentle, like the first light of morning. Simple notes, a basic melody, nothing fancy, but then it started to grow. He added complexity, layers of sound building on top of each other. His left hand established a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat, steady and strong. The melody changed, taking on elements of different styles. There were classical influences, yes, but also jazz, blues. Even a bit of the Latin music he heard in his neighborhood growing up. He blended them all together into something that was completely his own. The audience listened in amazement. Improvisation was hard. Doing it well was even harder. But Daniel made it look easy, his fingers dancing across the keys, finding notes that shouldn't work together but somehow did. He played about life in his neighborhood. The sound of kids playing basketball in the park. The ice cream truck that came by every summer evening. His mother humming while she cooked dinner. His father's tired footsteps coming home late at night. All of it became music under his hands. There were moments of joy in the piece, bright and energetic, but also moments of sadness, of struggle, of uncertainty. He didn't hide the hard parts. He put them in the music, let them exist alongside the beauty. Professor Martin leaned over to Professor Walsh. Is this really improvisation? It's so structured, so coherent. I think it is, she whispered back. Look at his face. He's discovering it as he goes, and she was right. Daniel was surprising himself with what came out. He would start a phrase not knowing where it would end, and his fingers would find the way. It was like the music already existed somewhere in the universe, and he was just the one channeling it into the world. After about 6 minutes, he brought the piece to a close. The ending was quiet, peaceful, like someone falling asleep after a long day. The final chord faded slowly, and once again the auditorium fell silent. Then the applause came again, just as strong as before. Daniel stood and bowed, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and energy. Playing like that, putting everything into the music, it took something out of you, but it also filled you up at the same time. Professor Walsh climbed onto the stage again. Daniel, I need to ask you something. Your family, are they here today? No, ma'am. They're both at work. What do they do? My mom cleans offices downtown. My dad works at a warehouse loading trucks. She nodded slowly. And how did you pay for this audition? I've been saving for 3 years. I work at a grocery store after school and on weekends. One of the students in the audience let out a small gasp. 3 years of saving just for an audition. Most of them spent that much money on a single music camp. Do you have a piano at home? Dr. Park asked. No, ma'am. We don't have room for one, and we couldn't afford it anyway. I practice at the community center whenever they're open. Sometimes I can only get 30 minutes before someone else needs the room. Professor Martin shook his head in disbelief. You taught yourself to play like this with only limited access to a piano? Yes, sir. And I watch videos on the library computers when I can. I've probably watched every famous pianist's recordings at least 20 times each. The 3 judges exchanged looks. They were all thinking the same thing, Daniel could tell. They had never encountered anyone quite like him. Daniel, Professor Walsh said, her voice serious now. Normally we mail out audition results within 2 weeks. But I'm going to tell you something right now, and the other judges can correct me if they disagree. She glanced at Professor Martin and Dr. Park. They both nodded. You're in. Full scholarship. Tuition, books, everything. We want you at Westmont. For a moment, Daniel couldn't process what he had just heard. Full scholarship? Everything covered? He felt dizzy, like the room was spinning. Are you serious? He managed to ask. Completely serious, Dr. Park said, smiling. Daniel, you have something special. Something we cannot let slip away. This academy exists to nurture talent, and you have more raw talent than anyone I've seen in years. The students in the audience started clapping again. Even Victoria was smiling, a real smile this time, not the fake one from before. Thank you, Daniel said, and his voice cracked a little. Thank you so much. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Professor Walsh replied, but I need you to do something for me. I need you to wait here for about 15 minutes. There's someone I want to call. Someone who needs to hear about you. She pulled out her phone and walked to the side of the stage, dialing a number. The other judges stayed with Daniel, asking him questions about his musical journey, about what pieces he loved to play, about his dreams for the future. Daniel answered as best he could, but his mind was racing. Full scholarship. He was going to study at Westmont Music Academy. Him, the kid from the rough neighborhood, the kid who learned piano from YouTube. He thought about his parents and felt tears threatening to come. They had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and now he could actually pursue his dream without worrying about the cost. He couldn't wait to tell them. Professor Walsh came back, her phone still in her hand, and her face was lit up with excitement. Okay, here's what's going to happen. I just spoke to a colleague of mine, a very important colleague. His name is Viktor Petrov. Daniel's eyes went wide. The Viktor Petrov? The concert pianist? The very same. He's also a teacher, though he rarely takes on new students anymore. I sent him a recording of your performance just now, the one I took on my phone. He watched it and wants to meet you. Tomorrow, if possible. Tomorrow? Daniel repeated, feeling overwhelmed. He lives about an hour from here. I can drive you there myself if you need transportation. Daniel, you need to understand what this means. Viktor Petrov doesn't just meet with anyone. If he wants to see you, it's because he thinks you're worth his time. And trust me, his time is very valuable. I have work tomorrow, Daniel said, then immediately felt stupid. Here was the opportunity of a lifetime, and he was worried about his shift at the grocery store. I'm sure they'll understand if you need a day off, Dr. Park said gently. This is important, Daniel. This could change your entire life. Daniel nodded slowly. Okay, yes, I'll be there. Professor Walsh smiled. Good, I'll email you the details tonight. And Daniel? Be prepared. Victor is demanding. He's not going to go easy on you just because you impressed us today. He's going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed. I can handle it, Daniel said, and he meant it. After everything he had been through, after all the years of struggling and working and practicing on a broken piano, he could handle anything. The judges finally released him, telling him again how incredible his performance had been. As Daniel walked back up the aisle toward the exit, students he had never met before stopped him to shake his hand or tell him how amazing he was. Victoria appeared in front of him, blocking his path. For a second, Daniel tensed, expecting more cruelty, but her expression was different now. She looked embarrassed. Hey, she said quietly, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For what I said earlier. That was really mean and unfair. Daniel studied her face, trying to figure out if she was being sincere. She seemed to be. It's okay, he said finally. I get it. You didn't know. Still, I shouldn't have judged you like that. You're insanely talented. Like scary talented, she paused. Do you think maybe we could practice together sometime? I could learn a lot from you. That surprised him. This girl who had made fun of him now wanted to learn from him. Yeah, sure, Daniel said. That would be cool. She smiled, relieved. Great. I'll see you around campus then. Congratulations on the scholarship. As Daniel finally made it out of the auditorium and into the hallway, he felt like he was floating. Everything that had happened in the last hour felt like a dream. The performance, the standing ovation, the scholarship, Victor Petrov wanting to meet him. He pulled out his phone and called his mom. She answered on the third ring. Daniel, is everything okay? Your audition isn't until later. Mom, he said, and he couldn't keep the excitement out of his voice. Mom, you're not going to believe what just happened. Daniel could barely sleep that night. He lay in his small bedroom, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in his mind. The audition felt like something that had happened to someone else, like a movie he had watched rather than something he had actually lived through. His parents had been overwhelmed when he told them the news. His mother cried, actually sobbed with joy, holding him tight and thanking God over and over. His father, who rarely showed much emotion, had tears in his eyes too. They had called his grandparents, his aunts and uncles, everyone they could think of to share the news. But now, in the quiet darkness of his room, Daniel felt nervous about meeting Victor Petrov. He had spent the evening researching the famous pianist, watching videos of his performances, reading interviews. The man was a legend. He had performed at every major concert hall in the world. He had won competitions that most pianists only dreamed of entering, and tomorrow Daniel would be playing for him. The next morning came too quickly. Daniel got up at 6 even though his meeting wasn't until 10. He showered, put on his best clothes, which still weren't great, and tried to eat breakfast. His stomach was too jumbled with nerves to handle much food. Professor Walsh picked him up at 8:30. She drove a nice car, but not too fancy, and she chatted with him during the drive to help calm his nerves. She told him stories about her own auditions when she was young, about the mistakes she made, the lessons she learned. Victor can seem intimidating, she said, as they got closer to their destination. He's very direct, very honest. If he thinks you're doing something wrong, he'll tell you. But don't take it personally. He only pushes people he believes in. What if I mess up? Daniel asked. Then you mess up. It happens. Just be yourself. Play from your heart like you did yesterday. That's all you can do. They pulled up to a building that looked like an old warehouse that had been converted into something else. The outside was brick, weathered and worn, but the windows were new and clean. This is it, Professor Walsh said. His studio is on the 3rd floor. They walked inside and took an old elevator that groaned and creaked as it climbed. When the doors opened, they stepped into a massive open space. The entire floor was one huge room with exposed brick walls, high ceilings with wooden beams and natural light pouring in from enormous windows. And the pianos. There were 3 grand pianos, each one positioned in a different area of the studio. The walls were covered with shelves full of sheet music, books about music theory, photos of famous composers and musicians. In the center of the room stood a man. He was tall and thin, probably in his 70s, with silver hair combed back from his forehead. He wore simple black clothes and was looking at a piece of sheet music when they entered. "Catherine," he said, looking up and smiling at Professor Walsh. His accent was thick, Russian maybe. "Thank you for bringing him. Victor, this is Daniel Chen." Viktor Petrov walked over and Daniel felt his heart pounding. The man's eyes were sharp, intelligent, studying Daniel like he was trying to see into his soul. "So you are the boy who taught himself Rachmaninoff from YouTube," Victor said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Daniel replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Show me your hands." Daniel held out his hands, palms down. Victor took them, turning them over, examining his fingers like a doctor examining a patient. Good structure, strong but flexible. He released Daniel's hands. "Catherine sent me the recording. I watched it 3 times last night. I don't usually watch things 3 times. Thank you, sir. I didn't say it was perfect. I said I watched it 3 times. There's a difference." Victor walked over to one of the pianos and gestured for Daniel to follow. "Play something for me. Not Rachmaninoff. Something else. Something you love." Daniel sat at the piano. His mind raced through his mental catalog of pieces. What should he play? What would impress this legend? Then he remembered Professor Walsh's advice. Be yourself. He started playing a piece by Chopin, one of the nocturnes. It was beautiful and melancholic, full of emotion. He had always loved this piece because it felt like longing, like missing something you never had. He played for about 5 minutes, putting everything into it. When he finished, he looked up at Victor, trying to read his expression. Victor was nodding slowly. "You have excellent touch. The phrasing is mostly good, but there are technical issues. Your left hand, sometimes it's too loud, covering the melody. And here?" He sat beside Daniel on the bench and demonstrated. "This passage, you're rushing it slightly. It should breathe more like this." Victor played the same section, and Daniel immediately heard the difference. It was subtle but important. For the next hour, Victor worked with Daniel on various aspects of his playing. Technique, posture, pedal work, dynamics. He was demanding, correcting every small mistake, making Daniel play the same section over and over until it was right. But he was also encouraging. When Daniel did something well, Victor acknowledged it. "Good, that's better. You're learning quickly." Professor Walsh sat in a chair across the room, watching with interest. She had seen Victor work with students before. But there was something different about the attention he was giving Daniel. Finally, Victor stood up from the piano and walked to the windows, looking out at the city below. Daniel waited, not sure what to say. "You have a gift," Victor said without turning around. "A real gift. But gift alone is not enough. There are many people with gifts who never become great because they don't work hard enough. And there are people with less natural talent who become great because they work harder than everyone else." "I'm willing to work hard," Daniel said. Victor turned around. "Are you?" "Because I'm about to make you an offer. And if you accept, your life will change completely. It will not be easy. In fact, it will be the hardest thing you've ever done." "What kind of offer?" "I will teach you, properly. Not just one lesson here and there. I will take you on as my student. Train you the way I was trained when I was young. But you must be committed. You must be willing to practice 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours a day. You must be willing to miss parties, miss hanging out with friends, miss normal teenage things." Daniel felt his breath catch. Viktor Petrov wanted to teach him? Actually teach him? "There's something else," Victor continued. "In 6 months, there is a competition. The International Young Pianist Competition. It happens in New York City. Pianists from all over the world compete. The winners, they get opportunities that change everything. Recording contracts, concert bookings, management representation. You think I could compete in something like that? I think if we work very hard for 6 months, you could not only compete, you could win. Or at least place high enough to get noticed by the right people." Victor walked closer. "But I need to know you're serious. I'm too old to waste time on students who aren't fully committed." Daniel thought about his life. His job at the grocery store. Hanging out with friends on weekends. The small amount of free time he had. Then he thought about his parents working jobs they didn't love so they could provide for him. He thought about that broken piano at the community center. He thought about every person who ever looked at him and saw only poverty, never potential. "I'm serious," Daniel said firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes." Victor studied him for a long moment, then smiled. It was a small smile, but genuine. Good, then we start tomorrow. 8 in the morning. Bring water and snacks because you'll be here for most of the day. I have school. Talk to your school. Explain the situation. Maybe they can arrange something. Some kind of independent study. If you're going to do this, you need time. Lots of time. Professor Walsh stood up. I can help with the school situation. Westmont has connections. We can make it work. The rest of the morning was spent discussing logistics. How Daniel would balance schoolwork with practice. How they would prepare for the competition. What pieces he would need to learn. Before Daniel left, Victor gave him a list of practice exercises and pieces to work on. Learn these, he said. When you come tomorrow, I want to see that you've made progress. In the car on the way home, Daniel looked at the list. It was extensive. Hours and hours of work, but he didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt excited. He likes you, Professor Walsh said as she drove. Victor doesn't take on students unless he sees something special. You should feel honored. I do. I can't believe this is real. It's real, Daniel. Your life is changing. What happens next is up to you. Over the following days, Daniel threw himself into practice with an intensity he had never experienced before. His school agreed to let him do half days, finishing his core classes in the morning and spending afternoons at Victor's studio. His job at the grocery store was harder to leave. He needed the money. But when his boss heard about the opportunity, about the competition, he did something unexpected. He reduced Daniel's hours but kept him on the schedule for just weekend mornings, paying him the same amount as before. My daughter plays violin, his boss explained. I know how expensive music can be. Consider it my investment in your future. When you're famous, you can mention my store in an interview. The community at large started rallying around Daniel too. The community center where he had learned to play held a small fundraiser to help with competition expenses. Neighbors he barely knew donated money. The next 6 months were the most intense period of Daniel's life. Every single day followed the same pattern. Wake up at 5:30, quick breakfast. School from 7 to noon, lunch while traveling to Victor's studio. Practice from 1 until 9 or 10 at night. Home, sleep, repeat. His fingers developed calluses. His back ached from hours of sitting. There were nights when he fell asleep the moment his head hit the pillow, too exhausted to even change his clothes. But something amazing was happening. He was getting better. Not just a little better. Dramatically, noticeably better. Victor was a tough teacher, maybe the toughest Daniel had ever encountered. He would make Daniel play the same 4 measures 50 times in a row until they were perfect. He would stop him mid-phrase to correct the angle of his wrist or the pressure of a single finger. Again, Victor would say, his most common word, again. No, listen, this note, it should sing. You're playing it like it's just another note. It's not. It's the heart of the phrase. Again. Some days Daniel wanted to quit, days when nothing seemed to go right, when every note felt wrong, when his fingers wouldn't do what his brain told them to. On one particularly bad day, about 3 months into training, Daniel finally broke down. He was working on a Liszt piece, one of the Transcendental Etudes, and he just couldn't get it. He had been playing the same section for 2 hours and it kept falling apart. I can't do this, Daniel said, his voice thick with frustration. It's too hard. I'm not good enough. Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he sat beside Daniel on the bench. You know what separates good pianists from great ones? Victor asked. It's not talent. Talent is common. The world is full of talented people who never achieve anything. You know what the difference is? Daniel shook his head. The difference is that great pianists play through the wall. You know what I mean by the wall? It's that point where everything feels impossible. Where your brain says stop, you can't do it. Most people, they hit that wall and they give up. They find something easier. But great pianists? They play through it. They push past the pain and the frustration and the doubt. And on the other side of that wall is where the magic happens. Victor placed his hands on the keys and played the section Daniel had been struggling with. It sounded effortless, beautiful. You think this came easy to me? When I was your age, I practiced this piece for 6 months before I could play it properly. 6 months of hitting that same wall over and over, but I kept going. And eventually I broke through. He looked at Daniel with those sharp eyes. So the question is, are you going to stop at the wall? Or are you going to push through? Daniel took a deep breath. I'm going to push through. Good. Then let's try again. And they did. And slowly, painfully, the piece started to come together. But it wasn't all struggle. There were breakthrough moments that made everything worth it. Times when Daniel would suddenly understand something that had been confusing him for weeks. Times when a piece would finally click and the music would flow out of him like water. Victor began having Daniel perform for small audiences in the studio. Fellow musicians, other teachers, sometimes random people Victor invited just to create pressure. These mini performances helped Daniel get comfortable with being watched, with handling nerves. Professor Walsh visited regularly, checking on Daniel's progress and bringing encouragement. She also connected Daniel with other students from Westmont, creating a support system of young musicians who understood what he was going through. Victoria, the girl from the audition, became an unexpected friend. She would come to Victor's studio sometimes to practice, and she and Daniel would take breaks together, talking about music and life. She was still privileged and sometimes didn't understand his struggles, but she was trying, and Daniel appreciated that. 4 months into training, Victor made an important decision. It's time to decide what you'll play for the competition. You need 3 pieces. 1 Baroque, 1 classical or romantic, and 1 20th century or contemporary. They spent a week selecting the perfect pieces. For Baroque, they chose a Bach prelude and fugue. For romantic, a Chopin ballad. And for contemporary, Victor suggested something unusual. I want you to play your improvisation, he said. The one you played at your audition. But structured. Written down. We'll turn it into a proper composition. Really? You think that's good enough? Good enough? Daniel. That improvisation showed more originality than most contemporary composers manage in their entire careers. We're going to refine it, give it structure, make it bulletproof. It will be your secret weapon. So they worked on taking Daniel's improvisation and turning it into a formal piece. They wrote it down, note by note, then refined it, made some sections stronger, clarified others. The end result was a 7-minute composition that blended classical technique with modern sensibilities and personal experience. Victor named it From the Margins because that's what Daniel's journey was. Starting from the margins of society and fighting his way to the center. As the competition date grew closer, the pressure increased. Daniel started having dreams about performing. Sometimes they were good dreams where everything went perfectly. Other times they were nightmares where he forgot the music or his fingers stopped working. Victor noticed the anxiety. Nerves are normal, he told Daniel. Even professionals get nervous. The key is to use the nerves, not let them use you. That adrenaline, that energy, it can make you play better if you channel it correctly. 2 weeks before the competition, they did a full dress rehearsal. Victor invited about 50 people to the studio, setting it up like a real concert. Daniel played all 3 of his pieces in front of this audience, treating it exactly like the competition. It went well, but not perfect. He made a few small mistakes, lost his concentration once in the middle of the Chopin. Afterward, Victor gave him detailed notes on what to improve. You're almost there, Victor said. The technical work is solid. Now it's about the mental game, believing you belong on that stage. The week before the competition, Victor did something unexpected. He gave Daniel 2 days off. No practicing, he said firmly. Rest your hands, rest your mind. Go do something fun. See a movie. Hang out with friends. Just don't touch a piano. Daniel thought he would go crazy not practicing, but Victor was right. The break helped. When he came back to the piano after 2 days, everything felt fresh again. 3 days before they were supposed to leave for New York, Daniel got a visit from a local news reporter. Someone had told them about his story, and they wanted to do a segment. Daniel was hesitant at first. He didn't want the attention. But Professor Walsh convinced him it would be good. People need to hear stories like yours, she said. It gives hope to other kids who think they can't achieve their dreams because of where they come from. So he did the interview. He told them about learning piano on the broken instrument at the community center, about teaching himself from videos, about his audition and meeting Victor. The reporter seemed genuinely moved by his story. The segment aired 2 days later, just before Daniel left for New York. It was only 5 minutes long, but in those 5 minutes, Daniel's life changed again. His phone blew up with messages, friends from school, relatives he hadn't talked to in years, even strangers sending encouragement. The community center where he learned to play called to say they were proud of him. His old elementary school wanted him to come speak to students when he got back. The attention was overwhelming but also touching. Daniel realized that his journey wasn't just about him anymore. He was representing everyone who had ever been counted out because they didn't have money or connections or the right background. The night before leaving for New York, Daniel's parents threw a small gathering. Just close family and a few neighbors. His mother cooked all his favorite foods. People gave speeches telling Daniel how proud they were. His father, who rarely spoke at these kinds of things, stood up to say something. When Daniel was little, maybe 7 or 8, we couldn't afford much for Christmas. We got him a keyboard from a thrift store. It was missing keys and half the sounds didn't work, but he played that thing for hours every day. His father's voice cracked a little. I remember thinking, I wish I could give him better. I wish I could give him everything. He looked at Daniel, tears in his eyes. But you didn't need everything. You just needed a chance, and you took that chance and turned it into something beautiful. Whatever happens at this competition, you've already won. You've already shown the world what you're made of. Daniel hugged his father tight, both of them crying now. His mother joined in, and for a moment everything else faded away. The competition, the pressure, all of it. There was just family, just love. That night, lying in bed, Daniel thought about the journey that had brought him here. From that broken piano at the community center, to training with one of the world's greatest pianists. From being laughed at for his poverty, to having a chance to compete on an international stage. He thought about Victor's words about pushing through the wall. He had pushed through so many walls, and tomorrow he would face the biggest wall yet, but he was ready. He had worked for this, sacrificed for this, and no matter what happened, he would walk onto that stage with his head held high. The flight to New York was Daniel's first time on an airplane. Victor had flown up 2 days earlier to handle registration and other logistics, so Professor Walsh accompanied Daniel and his parents. As the plane took off, Daniel watched his city get smaller and smaller below him, and he felt a strange mixture of excitement and fear. His mother held his hand during takeoff. She had never been on a plane either. His father sat by the window trying to appear calm but gripping the armrest tightly. They landed at JFK in the late afternoon. The city hit Daniel like a wave. So many people, so many buildings, so much noise and movement. Everything was bigger, faster, louder than back home. Victor had arranged for them to stay at a hotel near the venue where the competition would be held. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and comfortable. Daniel's parents were overwhelmed by everything. His mother kept taking pictures with her phone, wanting to capture every moment. That evening, Victor met them for dinner at a small restaurant near the hotel. He looked at Daniel carefully, studying his face, his energy. How do you feel? Victor asked. Nervous? Excited? Both. Good. Both is good. Victor cut into his food. Tomorrow is just rehearsal day. You'll get to see the venue, practice on the actual stage piano. Then the competition starts the day after. Remember what we talked about? You belong there. You've earned your place. The next morning, they went to the concert hall. Daniel had seen pictures online, but nothing prepared him for the real thing. The building was massive, with tall columns and marble everywhere. Inside, the main hall was breathtaking. Row after row of red velvet seats, balconies rising up on both sides, and a stage that seemed enormous under bright lights. About 30 other competitors were there for rehearsal, and Daniel immediately felt out of place again. These weren't like the students at Westmont. These were competitors from around the world. He heard conversations in languages he didn't recognize. Everyone looked polished, professional, confident. A girl from South Korea was practicing scales that were so fast her fingers were a blur. A boy from Germany was playing Beethoven with such power the whole hall shook. Everyone seemed impossibly good. Daniel's heart sank. How could he compete with this? Victor seemed to read his thoughts. Stop comparing yourself to them. You're not here to be them. You're here to be you. That's enough. When it was Daniel's turn to rehearse on stage, he walked out slowly, taking in the massive space. The piano was a concert grand Steinway, perfectly maintained. He sat down and played through a section of his Bach piece, getting a feel for the instrument and the acoustics. The hall had amazing sound. Every note rang out clear and full. Daniel started to relax a little. This piano was beautiful to play. After rehearsal, they spent the rest of the day trying to stay calm. Daniel practiced lightly in his hotel room on a keyboard Victor had brought. His parents walked around the neighborhood exploring. That night, Daniel tried to sleep but managed only a few hours. His mind kept running through the music, preparing for tomorrow. Competition day arrived with gray skies and a slight drizzle. Daniel woke up at 6, ate a light breakfast, and tried to stay loose. Victor had him do breathing exercises and gentle stretches. No heavy practicing today, just staying ready. The competition was structured over 3 days. First day was the Baroque round. Second day was classical or romantic. Final day was contemporary, but only for competitors who made it through the first 2 rounds. Daniel was scheduled to perform at 2 in the afternoon on day 1. The morning dragged by impossibly slow. He tried to distract himself with TV, but nothing held his attention. He went for a short walk with his mother, but his mind kept drifting back to the music. Finally, it was time to go to the venue. The hall was packed with people. Families of competitors, music teachers, judges, media, and regular audience members who just loved piano. Daniel and his family found their seats in the area reserved for competitors and their guests. Victor sat beside Daniel. Remember, this is just the beginning. Day 1 is about making it through. Play clean, play solid. Save the magic for later rounds when fewer people remain. Daniel watched as other competitors performed. They were all excellent. The South Korean girl played Bach with machine-like precision. A boy from Brazil played with such passion the audience gave him a standing ovation. The German kid played with such technical perfection it seemed impossible. Each performance raised Daniel's anxiety higher. These people had trained at the best schools in the world. They had resources he could only dream of. What was he thinking coming here? Then his name was called. Daniel Chen, United States. His legs felt weak as he stood. His mother squeezed his hand. You can do this, mijo. We believe in you. Victor walked with him to the stage entrance. Remember what I told you. You belong here. Now go prove it. Daniel walked onto the stage alone. The lights were bright, making it hard to see the audience. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him. The weight of the moment pressed down on his shoulders. He sat at the piano and adjusted the bench. Took a deep breath. Placed his hands on the keys. For a moment, his mind went blank. Complete emptiness. He couldn't remember the first note. Panic started to rise in his chest. Then he heard Victor's voice in his head. Play through the wall. Daniel closed his eyes and let his fingers remember what his mind couldn't. And they did. The first notes of the Bach prelude came out clear and strong. After that, muscle memory took over. 6 months of practice, of repetition, of drilling these pieces into his bones. His fingers knew what to do even when his brain was foggy with nerves. The Bach was technically clean, but emotionally, Daniel knew he had held back. He had played it safe, not wanting to make mistakes. When he finished, the applause was polite but not enthusiastic. He walked off stage feeling disappointed in himself. Victor met him at the entrance. You played it safe, Victor said. It wasn't a question. I was nervous, I know. But safe doesn't win competitions. Tomorrow you need to take risks. Tomorrow you need to be Daniel, not just another pianist playing the notes. That evening the judges posted results. The top 20 competitors from day 1 would move forward to day 2. Daniel checked the list with his heart pounding. His name was there. Number 17 out of 20. He had made it through, but barely. His parents were thrilled, hugging him and celebrating. But Daniel felt frustrated. He knew he could do better. He had to do better. That night, Victor came to his hotel room. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That wasn't your best playing, but you made it through, and that's what matters. Now forget about today. Tomorrow is a new chance. What if I choke again? Victor sat down across from Daniel. You know what your problem is? You're so worried about failing that you're not letting yourself succeed. These other competitors, they grew up believing they deserve to be here. You need to believe it too. But they've had so many advantages. So what? You think the piano cares about advantages? You think the music cares where you learned or who taught you? When you sit at that piano tomorrow, none of that matters. All that matters is what comes out of your fingers. Victor stood to leave, then turned back. Daniel, I'm going to tell you something I don't tell many people. When I was young, I competed in this same competition. I was so nervous in the first round that I nearly quit. But someone told me something that changed everything. They said, you're not here to prove you're good enough. You're here to share your gift. That's all you need to do tomorrow. Share your gift. After Victor left, Daniel thought about those words. Share your gift, not prove anything. Just share. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the messages of support from people back home. Hundreds of them. Friends, teachers, neighbors, even people he didn't know who had seen his story on the news. One message was from a kid at the community center. "You're showing us that dreams can come true. Don't give up." Daniel felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about him anymore. He was carrying the hopes of people who saw themselves in his story. The next morning he woke up with a new mindset. He wasn't going to play it safe. He wasn't going to hold back. He was going to play the Chopin Ballade the way he felt it, with all the emotion and passion that had been building inside him for 6 months. When he arrived at the venue, he felt different, calmer, more centered. His parents noticed immediately. "You look ready," his father said. "I am ready." Daniel was scheduled to perform at 3 in the afternoon. He watched other competitors play, but this time he didn't compare himself to them. He just listened, appreciating their artistry. When his name was called, he stood up without hesitation. Walked onto that stage like he owned it, sat at the piano like he had played there 1,000 times before. The lights came up. The hall fell silent. And this time, when Daniel placed his hands on the keys, there was no doubt, no fear. There was only music. The first notes of the Chopin Ballade rang through the concert hall, and immediately everyone could tell this was different from yesterday. This wasn't safe playing. This was raw, honest, fearless. Daniel poured everything into the music. All the struggle of growing up poor, the feeling of being looked down on, the years of practicing on a broken piano, the doubt, the hope, the determination, it all flowed through his fingers into the keys. The ballad was a journey. It started gently, almost questioning, like asking if dreams were possible. Then it built, growing more confident, more powerful. There were moments of darkness, of struggle, but they resolved into passages of triumph and beauty. The audience sat mesmerized. Several judges leaned forward in their seats. In the wings, Victor stood with his arms crossed, a small smile on his face. This was the Daniel he knew. This was the player he had trained. Daniel's mother was crying openly in the audience. His father held her hand tightly, his own eyes wet with tears. They had never heard their son play in a space like this, with acoustics that made every note soar. When Daniel reached the final section of the ballade, the most technically demanding part, his fingers moved with absolute precision. The rapid notes were clean and even. The dramatic chords rang out with power. And then, the gentle ending, like a question finally answered, like peace after a storm. The last note faded into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the applause erupted. Not polite applause like yesterday. This was genuine, enthusiastic, moved applause. People were standing, not all of them, but enough to matter. Daniel stood and bowed, his heart racing, his hands trembling slightly. He had done it. He had actually done it. He walked off stage feeling like he was floating. Victor met him with a rare, broad smile. Now that was playing. That was the Daniel I know. Professor Walsh was there too, having flown in that morning. She hugged him tight. That was magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. The rest of day 2 felt like a blur. Other competitors performed. Some were excellent. Some made mistakes. Daniel watched and listened, but he felt strangely calm now. He had given his best. Whatever happened next was out of his control. That evening, the results were posted. Only 10 competitors would advance to the final day. Daniel found the list, scanning for his name with his heart in his throat. There it was, Daniel Chen, number 4. He had jumped from 17th to 4th place. His parents screamed with joy right there in the hallway. Other competitors and their families stared, some smiling, some looking annoyed. But Daniel didn't care what they thought anymore. He had earned this. The final day of competition was the most nerve-wracking yet. This was where reputations were made. The contemporary round, where 10 pianists would compete for the top prizes. First place received $25,000, a recording contract with a major label, and bookings at prestigious venues around the world. Second and third place received smaller prizes, but still significant recognition. Daniel was scheduled to perform 7th out of 10, which Victor said was a good position. Not too early when the judges were still getting warmed up. Not too late when they might be tired. The piece he would play was, From the Margins, his own composition. The risky choice. Other competitors were playing established contemporary works by recognized composers. Daniel was playing something he had created himself. What if they don't like it? Daniel asked Victor that morning. Then they don't like it. But at least you'll have played something true to yourself. That's worth more than playing it safe with someone else's music. The final day began at noon. The concert hall was even more packed than the previous days. Word had spread about some of the standout performers, and Daniel was surprised to realize he was one of them. A few people in the audience recognized him and waved. The first competitor played a piece by Philip Glass, minimalist and hypnotic. It was well executed but didn't generate much excitement. The second played something aggressive and modern that some people loved and others seemed confused by. Each performance was strong. These were the top 10 competitors. Nobody here was weak. Then it was Daniel's turn. As he walked onto the stage, he noticed something. The hall seemed more attentive, more focused. People knew who he was now. They had heard about the kid from the community center, the YouTube learner who had made it this far. Daniel sat at the piano and paused before starting. He looked out at the audience, though the lights made it hard to see specific faces. He thought about what this piece represented. His journey, his story. Then he began to play From the Margins. The piece started with the same gentle melody he had improvised at his audition. But now it was refined, structured, more powerful. It built slowly, adding layers of complexity, incorporating elements of classical structure with modern harmonies. There was a section that sounded like the neighborhood where Daniel grew up. You could almost hear the sounds of the street, the rhythm of urban life. Then it shifted into something more classical, representing his journey into the world of formal music. The two styles blended together, showing that you didn't have to abandon where you came from to reach where you were going. The middle section was intense, almost chaotic. This represented struggle, uncertainty, the feeling of not belonging. The notes clashed and fought against each other. But then gradually they found resolution. They came together into a beautiful harmony that felt like acceptance, like finally finding your place. The final section was triumphant, but also humble. It acknowledged the journey while staying grateful for every person and every opportunity that made it possible. It ended with a simple return to the opening melody, but played with more confidence, more certainty. When the last note faded, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the applause began, and it was thunderous. Nearly everyone in the hall stood. The judges were standing. Victor was standing. Professor Walsh was standing. Daniel's parents were on their feet, clapping and crying and laughing all at once. Daniel stood and bowed, overwhelmed by the response. He had shared his gift, just like Victor said, and people had received it. The final 3 competitors performed after him. They were all excellent. A girl from Japan played something beautiful and delicate. A boy from France played with incredible technical skill. The last competitor from Russia played with such emotion that several people in the audience were crying. Then it was over. All the performances were done. The judges would deliberate for 2 hours and announce the results at 6 o'clock. Those 2 hours felt longer than the entire 6 months of preparation. Daniel and his family went to a nearby cafe, but nobody could eat much. They mostly just sat there talking nervously, checking their phones constantly. Victor remained calm as always. Whatever happens, you should be proud. You've accomplished something remarkable just by getting this far. But do you think I have a chance? Daniel asked. Victor smiled. I think you have more than a chance. At 5:30 they returned to the concert hall. It was packed with people, all waiting for the announcement. Daniel saw other competitors, some looking confident, others looking as nervous as he felt. At exactly 6 o'clock, the head judge walked onto the stage. She was an older woman, a famous pianist herself, someone Daniel had watched on YouTube years ago when he was first learning. Good evening, everyone, she began. This has been an exceptional year for the International Young Pianists Competition. The level of talent we witnessed over these 3 days was truly remarkable. Every competitor should be proud of their performances. She went on to thank sponsors and organizers. Daniel barely heard any of it. His heart was pounding so loud it drowned out most of her words. Now for the results. I'll announce them in reverse order, starting with 3rd place. 3rd place went to the boy from France. He walked on stage to accept his award, smiling but clearly hoping for higher placement. 2nd place, the judge continued. Goes to... She opened an envelope. Yuki Tanaka from Japan. The delicate girl who had played so beautifully walked on stage. She bowed graciously as she accepted her award. Daniel's mouth was dry. There was only one spot left. First place. But there were still 8 other competitors who could win it. And finally, first place. This was a very close decision. The judges deliberated for quite some time, but ultimately we were unanimous in our choice. The first place winner of this year's International Young Pianist Competition is... Time seemed to slow down. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat. His mother had grabbed his hand and was squeezing it so tight it hurt. Daniel Chen from the United States. For a second, Daniel couldn't process what he had heard. Then his mother screamed. His father pulled him into a hug. Professor Walsh was crying. Victor was nodding with satisfaction, saying, "I knew it, I knew it." Daniel walked to the stage in a daze. The applause was deafening. He shook the judge's hand, accepted the trophy and the giant check. Cameras flashed. People were calling his name. The judge leaned close to speak into his ear over the noise. "Your composition was extraordinary. It was honest and fresh and moving. You didn't just play music today. You told us who you are. That's what great art does." After the ceremony, reporters swarmed Daniel. They wanted to know everything. His background, his training, his story. He answered their questions as best he could, still in shock.